I have always considered myself the kind of person who sees the world through logic and reason. If someone tells me they saw a ghost, heard strange noises in an empty house, or experienced something that cannot be explained, my first reaction is usually skepticism. I am not the type of person who jumps to conclusions or believes every mysterious story I hear online. In fact, I am probably one of the biggest skeptics among the people I know. I have always believed there is a rational explanation for almost everything. Strange sounds usually have a simple cause. Shadows are often just tricks of the light, and most so-called paranormal encounters are, in my opinion, either exaggerated or completely made up. That is exactly why what happened to me a few weeks ago has left me completely shaken. Even now, as I sit here writing this, I still struggle to find the right words to describe what I experienced. I have replayed those moments in my head over and over again, trying to convince myself that there must be a logical explanation, but I cannot find one. I decided to write everything down while the memories are still fresh. Every sound, every detail, every strange feeling I had that night is still burned into my mind. Maybe by sharing this story, someone out there will be able to explain what happened. Maybe someone will notice something I missed, because right now I honestly have no idea what I encountered. It all started with my friend Steve and his wife planning a weekend trip for their anniversary. Steve and his wife rarely had the chance to travel alone. Between taking care of their 2 children and their dog, their lives were always busy. For some people that might sound like a small problem, but the reality was that Steve had worked hard for the life he built. He was financially comfortable and had built a huge house far away from the city, surrounded by nothing but trees, silence, and endless empty land. He loved his privacy. He liked being away from crowded neighborhoods and noisy streets. Honestly, I understood why. There was something peaceful about that place. It was isolated, quiet, and the kind of home where you could truly escape from the outside world. That weekend, everything seemed to line up perfectly for Steve and his wife. Their children were leaving town for a school trip, which meant they finally had a rare opportunity to spend a few days alone together. The only thing they needed was someone to watch their golden retriever while they were gone. When Steve told me about their plans, I immediately volunteered. I told him I would stay at the house, take care of the dog, and make sure everything was fine while they enjoyed their anniversary trip. The plan was simple. I would arrive Friday afternoon, stay until Sunday, and spend a quiet weekend relaxing with their dog. And honestly, I was looking forward to it. Steve prepared everything before leaving. He filled the refrigerator with food, stocked the kitchen with snacks, and made sure I had everything I could possibly need. Looking back, he probably went a little overboard, but I wasn't going to complain. I love dogs. I enjoy quiet weekends, and having an entire house to myself sounded like the perfect way to relax. At least that was what I thought. The first night started completely normal. The dog and I spent the evening on the couch watching movies. Everything felt peaceful. The house was silent, surrounded by darkness and miles of empty land. Around 9:00 p.m., Steve sent me a message. He jokingly wrote, "Don't get too scared being alone in that house. It can get pretty creepy at night when nobody else is around." I laughed and replied with a simple message telling him to stop trying to scare me. Because honestly, I wasn't worried. I had been alone plenty of times before. An empty house never bothered me. Being surrounded by darkness never bothered me. I knew the difference between imagination and reality, or at least I thought I did. That night, I went to sleep in the spare bedroom. The dog followed me upstairs and curled up nearby like he always did. Everything seemed normal. We went to bed around 1:00 the morning. Then, at exactly 3:21 a.m., everything changed. I suddenly woke up. At first, I didn't know why. Then I heard it. The dog was barking downstairs. Not a normal bark. This was different. It was aggressive, intense, and filled with panic. It sounded like the dog was trying to warn me about something. The kind of barking that immediately makes your body go alert before your brain even understands what is happening. I won't pretend I wasn't scared, but at first it was just the shock of being violently awakened in the middle of the night. I got out of bed and walked downstairs. The entire time, the dog never stopped barking. When I reached the kitchen, I saw him standing there. He was staring directly at the basement door. His body was completely frozen. The hair along his back was standing straight up. His ears were lowered, and every part of his body seemed to be telling me the same thing. Something was wrong. I called his name. I tried to calm him down. I told him everything was okay, but he ignored me. He kept staring at that basement door and barking like something on the other side was terrifying him. Then I reached for the doorknob. The moment my hand touched it, the dog completely lost control. He started running back and forth across the kitchen, barking louder than before. He looked almost desperate, like he was trying to stop me from opening that door. My first thought was simple. Someone was down there. Maybe an intruder had somehow gotten inside. It was unlikely because Steve had an expensive security system throughout the entire property, but at that moment I couldn't think of anything else. I grabbed the largest knife I could find in the kitchen. I know it sounds ridiculous now, but when you are standing in a dark house at 3:00 the morning and your friend's dog is terrified of something you cannot see, your mind starts imagining possibilities. I slowly opened the basement door. The dog rushed toward the entrance, but he didn't go down. He stopped at the top of the stairs. He stood there, staring into the darkness below. Then he started growling, a deep, threatening growl I had never heard from him before. His fur was still raised. I turned on the basement light. Nothing happened. I slowly walked down the stairs. I started yelling loudly, pretending to sound much braver than I actually felt. I shouted that whoever was down there needed to leave, but there was no response. No footsteps. No movement. Nothing. I searched every corner of that basement. I checked behind furniture. I opened closets. I looked into the bathroom. I searched every possible hiding place. There was nobody there. No intruder. No explanation. Nothing. But then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The temperature. The basement was freezing, not just slightly colder than upstairs. It was unbelievably cold. The kind of cold that felt unnatural. I knew basements could be cooler than the rest of a house, but this was different. I had been down there many times before. Even during the coldest days of winter, it had never felt like this. It felt as if the warmth had completely disappeared from that room. Still, I tried to convince myself there was a normal explanation. A cold basement was not enough reason to panic, so I closed the door and spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room with the dog beside me. Eventually, after what felt like hours, the dog finally calmed down. The house became silent again, and somehow we both managed to fall asleep. The strangest part was what happened the next morning. The dog was completely normal, almost like nothing had ever happened. He ran outside, played like usual, and acted happy and relaxed. I spent the day trying to forget about the previous night. I listened to music, watched movies, and enjoyed the quiet. At one point, I decided to go back down into the basement during the daytime, and that was when things became even more confusing. The temperature was normal, completely normal. It felt exactly like the rest of the house. There was no freezing air, no strange feeling, no sign that anything unusual had happened. I stood there for a while looking around, trying to understand what I had experienced hours earlier, but I found nothing. No explanation, no answer. Only one unsettling thought remained in my mind. Whatever had frightened that dog in the middle of the night, whatever made him stare at that basement door like he was looking at something I could not see, it was gone, at least for now. That night, after everything that had happened, I made a decision. I was not going back upstairs to sleep in that bedroom. I stayed on the couch in the living room, telling myself that if the dog had another strange reaction to the basement, I would be there immediately. I wanted to stay awake and keep watch, but eventually the quiet house, the dim lights, and the sound of the movie playing in the background slowly pulled me into sleep. For a while, everything was peaceful. Then once again, at almost the exact same time as the previous night, I woke up. The dog was losing his mind. His barking exploded through the house, loud and aggressive, like he was trying to warn me that something terrible was happening. It was the kind of barking that instantly sends a chill through your body because animals do not usually react that way without a reason. I jumped off the couch and rushed into the kitchen, and there he was again, standing in front of the basement door, barking, staring, terrified. I tried everything. I called his name. I told him to calm down. I tried comforting him and convincing him there was nothing there. But it was like I didn't exist. The dog completely ignored me. And somehow, this night was worse. Much worse. I had already seen how frightened he was the night before, but what I witnessed now was something different. The dog wasn't simply scared anymore. He was panicking. His movements were frantic. His eyes were locked on that basement door, and every instinct in his body seemed to be screaming at him to stay away. I kept telling myself that there was nothing downstairs. I had searched that basement. I knew nobody was hiding there. But the dog didn't care what I knew. He was reacting to something I couldn't see. Slowly, I reached for the doorknob. The moment my hand touched it, something happened that I still cannot forget. The barking stopped. Not because he calmed down, because he started crying. The dog began whimpering softly, almost like a frightened child. His entire body changed. The aggressive barking disappeared, replaced by fear and desperation. It was one of the strangest things I had ever witnessed. I immediately let go of the doorknob. The second my hand left it, the dog started barking again. I stood there, completely confused. I had no idea what I was looking at. I was frustrated. I was exhausted. And honestly, I was starting to feel uneasy. So I decided to try one more time. I grabbed the doorknob again. This time, the dog cried even louder. But I opened the door anyway. I walked down the stairs, and just like the previous night, the dog refused to follow. He stood at the top of the stairs, whining and shaking, watching me disappear into the basement alone. But this time, the basement felt different. The cold was still there, that same unnatural cold from the night before. But now there was something else. A smell. A horrible smell. The kind of smell that makes your stomach turn. I honestly don't know how to describe it. It wasn't simply a bad odor. It was something heavier, something unpleasant that seemed to fill the entire basement. The longer I stayed down there, the worse it became. I immediately started looking around. That was when I noticed something strange. Several family pictures that Steve had hanging on the wall had been knocked over. The bar stools near the counter were lying on the floor, but everything else was untouched. Nothing was broken. Nothing was stolen. Nothing else appeared disturbed. It was almost as if something had moved only those specific objects. I picked up the pictures. I stood the bar stools back up. I tried to convince myself there was some normal explanation. Maybe they had fallen somehow. Maybe the smell was from something old in storage. Maybe there was a simple reason for everything. But deep down, something felt wrong. The smell was becoming unbearable. I couldn't stay down there anymore. I went back upstairs and closed the basement door. For the next 30 minutes, the dog continued barking. I sat there, trying to understand what could possibly be causing that smell. What could make a dog react this way? What could make a basement suddenly feel freezing cold? What could knock over only a few objects and then disappear? Eventually, the dog finally calmed down. I gave him a treat, hoping to reassure him. Not long after that, we both fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, the first thing I did was go back downstairs. I wanted answers. I wanted to find the source of that horrible smell. But when I opened the basement door, I froze. The smell was gone. Completely gone. There wasn't even a trace of it. No lingering odor. No strange atmosphere. Nothing. And then came the part that confused me the most. The dog followed me downstairs. Not cautiously. Not nervously. He walked down happily like nothing had ever happened. The same dog that had refused to even enter the basement for 2 nights was now walking around down there without a single sign of fear. I stood there, completely speechless. I had no explanation, no theory, no logical answer. Something had happened in that basement. I just didn't know what. Steve returned home around 1:00 the morning. As expected, his dog was beyond excited. His wife took the dog outside while Steve and I sat down and started catching up. He asked me how everything went. I told him that for the most part everything was great, but when I said those words, he immediately noticed, for the most part, his expression changed. So I told him everything. I explained the barking, the basement door, the freezing temperature, the smell, the fallen pictures, the way his dog reacted. I expected him to laugh. I expected him to tell me I had fallen for some kind of prank, but he didn't. He didn't smile. He didn't make a joke. He just stood there silently. After a few moments, he looked down and finally spoke. He told me that when the dog was a puppy, he used to do something similar. Every once in a while, the dog would suddenly run to that basement door and start barking uncontrollably, sometimes for no obvious reason. They never understood why. Then one day, he simply stopped. It hadn't happened in years. Steve said he had completely forgotten about it, but I could tell something about my story bothered him. He looked more disturbed than I was. We talked about it for a while longer, but eventually I kept telling him not to worry. I told him there was probably a reasonable explanation, that maybe it was nothing. But I don't know if either of us truly believed that. It has been 2 weeks since that weekend, and I still cannot stop thinking about it. Steve told me that since they returned home, the dog has been completely normal. No barking, no strange behavior, no more incidents at the basement door. I have tried researching everything I can think of. I have searched for explanations. Animal behavior.
Possible causes?
Environmental reasons. Anything that could explain what happened. But every explanation falls apart when I consider all the details together. The timing, the dog's reaction, the smell that appeared and vanished, the objects that moved, the freezing temperature. Nothing adds up. So I have to ask, what happened in that basement? Why did that dog react like something terrifying was behind that door? What was that smell? Where did it come from? I need answers. Because the strangest part is that I don't even live in that house yet. I still think about it almost every day. I still wake up sometimes wondering if that dog was reacting to something real, something I couldn't see. Maybe there is a logical explanation. Maybe there isn't. But one thing is certain. The more time passes, the more unsettling this memory becomes. Because sometimes the scariest things are not the things we see. They are the things we know were there, even though we never saw them. A few years ago, I experienced something else that I still cannot fully explain. At the time, I had just gone through a breakup and decided to start over somewhere new. I moved into a small apartment inside a beautiful residential complex. The place was almost perfect. The building was elegant, quiet, and surrounded by a peaceful courtyard. The neighbors were friendly, and within a short amount of time, I had gotten to know several people living there. It felt safe. It felt like the kind of place where nothing bad could happen. At least that was what I believed. A few months after moving in, I began noticing something strange. One night, while I was getting ready for bed, I heard what sounded like footsteps running through the hallway outside my apartment. I stopped what I was doing and listened. The sound was clear. Someone was running. I walked quietly to the door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. There were no children living in the building, and I couldn't imagine why anyone would be running around at that hour. Still, I brushed it off. Strange things happen. I didn't think much of it. But then it happened again, and again. For several nights I heard the same sound. Running footsteps. Right outside my door. I never opened it. At the time, it didn't seem important enough to investigate. I should mention that my apartment was on the ground floor. My bedroom window faced the beautiful courtyard outside, and because of the design of the building, someone could easily walk right up close to the window. When I first moved in, that thought crossed my mind. But I wasn't worried. The community was peaceful. The people living there seemed kind. I trusted my surroundings. Until one night. That night I woke up suddenly. Not because of a noise inside my apartment. Because of a sound outside my bedroom window. Giggling. Quiet laughter. Children's laughter. I lay there for a moment confused. Then I realized someone was standing outside my window. I told myself it was probably just kids messing around. Maybe they were playing a prank. Maybe they thought it was funny. I reached over and tapped on the glass. Then I said loudly for them to stop. The laughter instantly disappeared. For a few seconds, everything was silent. Then I heard something that made my entire body freeze. A tapping sound. Coming from the other side of the glass, I stared at the window. My heart started beating faster. Someone was there. I knew it, but I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of knowing they scared me. I forced myself to stay calm. Then I grabbed the curtain and pulled it open as quickly as I could. The courtyard was empty. Completely empty. No children. No people. Nothing. I looked around trying to understand where they could have gone. There was nowhere to hide. The courtyard was open. The distance was too short. There was no possible way someone could have disappeared that quickly. I closed the curtain and tried to forget about it. I told myself it was probably nothing. But the giggling continued, night after night. I eventually decided to ignore it. I figured whoever was doing it would eventually get bored. I had younger relatives who loved playing childish jokes, and I knew from experience that ignoring them usually made them stop. So I did the same thing. I stopped reacting. I stopped looking. I stopped acknowledging whoever or whatever was outside my window. And for a while it seemed like that might actually work. Until 2 days later, while I was at work, I received an email from the apartment manager. And after reading that message, everything changed. The email from the apartment manager was strange. It was short. Too short. She didn't explain anything. She didn't tell me what was wrong. She simply asked if I could stop by the main office after work because there was something important she needed to show me. She even used the word urgent. Immediately, my mind started racing. I spent the entire day distracted and anxious trying to figure out what could possibly be happening. The first thing I thought was that there was some kind of problem with my apartment. Maybe my rent payment had failed. Maybe there was an issue with my lease. Maybe I had accidentally violated some building rule without realizing it. I kept running through possible explanations, but nothing made sense. When I finally arrived at the office after work, I could tell from the manager's expression that this was not about money. She looked nervous. Before saying anything, she asked me to lock the office door. That immediately made my stomach drop. She lowered her voice and began speaking almost like she was afraid someone might overhear us. A few seconds later, a man from the security office walked in and sat beside me. The manager looked at both of us and explained that while the security guard was reviewing camera footage earlier that day, he noticed something unusual, something involving my apartment. Then she turned the monitor toward me. What I saw next is something I will never forget. It was security footage from the hallway outside my apartment. The image quality was poor, grainy, and dark, but I could clearly see 2 small figures standing near my door. They appeared to be children, maybe around 10 or 12 years old. Both of them were wearing hooded clothing, making it impossible to see their faces clearly. At first, I thought they were simply standing there. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they were playing some kind of game. But then I noticed something disturbing. They were standing extremely close to my door, almost directly against it, only inches away. The security guard continued explaining that the strange part was not just that they were there, it was how long they stayed. The manager fast-forwarded the footage. The two figures did not move, not even slightly. For nearly 10 minutes, they stood completely still in front of my apartment. No talking, no walking around, no looking around, just standing there, like they were waiting. Then one of them slowly reached toward the doorknob. My entire body went cold. The child grabbed the handle and tried opening the door. The footage clearly showed the doorknob moving. The door shook several times. They were actually trying to get inside, but the door remained locked. After a few moments, the two figures suddenly moved away. They walked out of view of the camera almost casually, as if nothing strange had happened. I remember sitting there frozen, because now I knew those sounds I had been hearing at night were not my imagination. Someone really had been outside my apartment, and whoever those children were, they were coming specifically to my door. I immediately told the manager and the security officer about the window incident, the strange giggling, the tapping on the glass, the nights I heard someone outside. They went back through the footage searching for anything that could explain what happened, but they found nothing. No one appeared near my window. No children. No movement. Nothing. Eventually, we contacted the police. I gave them a statement and explained everything that had happened. They told me that if anything else occurred, I should call immediately. But at that moment, there was not much they could do. The security officer continued checking the building cameras, trying to track where the children went after leaving my apartment hallway. But that was when things became even stranger. They couldn't find them. Not on another hallway camera. Not near the entrances. Not outside the building. Not anywhere in the entire complex. It was as if those two children simply disappeared. That night, I decided I was not going to sleep. I was determined to catch them. I stayed awake for hours watching television with the volume low, waiting for any sound. I expected footsteps. I expected laughter. I expected something, but nothing happened. The entire night was silent. For several days afterward, everything seemed normal. I started convincing myself that maybe it was over. Maybe whoever those kids were had gotten bored. Maybe the police were right. Maybe it really was just some strange prank. Then about a week later, everything started again. It was around 1:30 inches the morning. I was sitting in my apartment watching television when something caught my attention. A sound from the hallway. I immediately muted the TV. Then I heard it. My doorknob. Moving. Someone was outside. Someone was trying to open my door. My heart started pounding. I knew exactly who it was. The children were back. I rushed toward the door and shouted for them to leave. For a moment, there was silence. Then I heard it. A child laughing. A soft, innocent laugh. And then a small voice whispered, "Mom, we're home. Just open the door and let us in." I froze. I didn't respond. I slowly leaned toward the peephole. What I saw made my blood run cold. Two small figures were standing outside. Their heads were lowered. I couldn't see their faces. They were just standing there in silence. Then the voice came again. "Please, let us in. We're home now. Please." That final word sounded different. It wasn't playful anymore. It sounded desperate, almost like they were begging. I stepped away from the door. I told them their mother didn't live there anymore. I told them I was calling the police if they didn't leave. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then both children started giggling, quietly, almost like they found my response funny. And then, the doorknob started shaking. Hard, one of them began throwing their body against the door. Again, and again. The entire door moved from the impact, but it held. I stood there holding the handle, terrified. I don't know how long I stayed like that. A minute, maybe longer. Then, suddenly, silence. The laughter stopped. The shaking stopped. Everything went completely quiet. I looked through the peephole one more time. Nobody was there, but I still couldn't bring myself to open the door. I kept thinking that maybe they were standing just outside the small view of the peephole, waiting. So I called the police. When they arrived, they immediately assumed it was probably local kids playing a prank. Honestly, I couldn't blame them. It was the most logical explanation. I gave my statement. They searched around, and eventually the night ended. A few days later, I ran into the apartment manager in the parking lot. She immediately pulled me aside. Her expression was serious. She asked me if anything else had happened since that night. I told her no. I told her I was pretty sure it was just some kids from the neighborhood messing around, but instead of agreeing, she looked uncomfortable. She shook her head. Then she told me something I still think about to this day. She said the woman who lived in my apartment before me was strange. Very strange. She told me she couldn't share personal details because of privacy concerns, but she said she was fairly certain something terrible had happened involving that woman's children. Something horrible. Something she didn't want to talk about. She never gave me a name. She never explained exactly what happened. She only warned me. Then she told me to be careful, to keep my doors locked, and as she walked away, she turned back and said something that has stayed with me ever since. This wasn't a prank. I never saw those children again while I lived there. But after moving out, I spent a lot of time trying to understand what actually happened. Who were those children? What did the manager know? What was she trying not to say? Was she suggesting something impossible? Was she suggesting those children weren't alive? Even writing that sounds ridiculous. I have never believed in ghosts. I still don't want to believe in anything paranormal, but there are details about this story that I cannot ignore. The security footage, the missing children, the fact that nobody could find where they went, the fact that they somehow entered a locked apartment building when no children lived in that section of the complex. That is the part that bothers me the most. Because the building required a key to enter, there was no easy way for strangers to get inside. So how did they get there? Where did they go afterward? And why did they keep coming to my door? Years have passed since this happened. I don't even live in that apartment anymore. But somehow, the memory has only become more frightening with time. When I was actually living through it, I was focused on finding a normal explanation. I was trying to convince myself it was just kids playing a cruel joke. But now, years later, looking back at every detail, the simple explanations don't feel as convincing anymore. Maybe there is a logical answer. Maybe those children were just pranksters. Maybe there is something I overlooked. But every time I replay those nights in my mind, one question always returns. Who were those children? And why did they keep asking me to open a door that was never meant to be theirs? Maybe, just maybe, I really did encounter something that was never meant to be understood. Something that was not from this world. Even now, years later, I still struggle to accept what happened to me. I have spent countless nights replaying every moment in my head, searching for a normal explanation, trying to convince myself that there must be a simple answer. But every explanation eventually falls apart. This story happened to me about 10 years ago. Without question, it remains one of the most terrifying experiences of my entire life. For a long time, I stopped telling people about it. Not because I forgot, not because it stopped bothering me, but because almost every time I shared it, people looked at me like I was making it up. They told me I was exaggerating. They told me it sounded impossible. Some even accused me of creating a fake story for attention. But my wife was the one person who never dismissed me. She was actually the person who convinced me to finally write everything down. She told me that maybe somewhere out there someone else had experienced something similar. Maybe someone else had felt the same fear, the same confusion, the same feeling of knowing something was wrong even when there was no logical way to explain it. So this is what happened. At the time, I was working a job that I had no passion for. It was just another one of those jobs people take because they need to pay bills and survive. Every morning I would wake up knowing exactly what the day would look like. The same routine. The same customers, the same repetitive tasks. The endless cycle of retail work was slowly exhausting me. I felt invisible, like I was just another person passing through life without anyone really noticing. Then one afternoon, something strange happened. I was leaving work and walking toward my car when I noticed something unusual. There was a bright neon pink piece of paper attached to my car door handle. At first, I thought it was some kind of advertisement or random trash that had blown there. But when I got closer, I realized it was a sticky note. Someone had deliberately placed it there. I picked it up. Written on it was a simple message. You're special, and I hope you have an amazing day. There was also a small smiley face sticker attached. I remember standing there for a moment surprised. It was unexpected, but honestly, it made me smile. At that point in my life, I wasn't receiving much positive attention from anyone, so seeing those words felt strangely comforting. Someone had noticed me. Someone had taken a moment out of their day to leave me a kind message. I thought it was sweet. Then I got into my car and drove home. I didn't think about it again until the next day, when I found another note. Same spot, same neon pink paper, another kind message, then another, and another. Every day when I left work, there was a new note waiting for me. At first, I thought it was strange. Some people told me later that it sounded creepy, and looking back now, maybe they were right. But at the time, I didn't see it that way. I actually enjoyed it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was paying attention to me. Someone cared enough to leave a small message behind. After 3 or 4 notes, I decided to respond. The next morning before going into work, I grabbed my own sticky notes. I wrote a message and placed it on my car door. I kept it friendly, but I will admit there was a little bit of playful flirting mixed in. I wanted to see who was behind this. Maybe it was someone from work. Maybe it was someone who had a crush on me. Maybe it was just a harmless joke. Either way, I was curious. When I finished my shift that afternoon, I walked outside, expecting to find another note, and I did. But this time, the message was different. The person had responded. They were flirting back. Suddenly, this mysterious exchange became something like a secret conversation between two strangers. I had no idea who I was talking to. I didn't know if it was serious or if someone was simply having fun with me. But for the next several days, we continued. A note from them, a note from me, back and forth. It became a strange little routine. Then came the day before my day off. Before starting my shift, I left one final note. It said something playful, something like, "Don't miss me too much while I'm gone tomorrow." I expected a funny response, maybe something flirtatious, maybe a joke. But when I left work that afternoon, the note waiting for me was different. There were only two things written: a sad face, nothing else. I remember laughing a little. I thought maybe the person was just playing along. I assumed this was where the whole thing would end. Maybe the mystery person had gotten bored. Maybe the game was over. I thought that because I responded, the fun was gone. I couldn't have been more wrong. The next morning I woke up and went about my normal routine. I cleaned the house. I took care of some things I had been putting off. It was late morning when I finally stepped outside, and the moment I saw my car, I stopped. There it was. Another neon, pink sticky note. Attached to my door handle. My heart sank, because nobody should have been able to leave a note there. I slowly walked toward my car. I remember feeling uneasy before I even touched it. I picked up the note, and I read the words, "You look cute when you're sleeping." Everything changed in that moment. The warm, harmless feeling I had before disappeared instantly. A cold wave of fear replaced it. Because that message meant one thing. Someone had been watching me. Someone had been close enough to see me asleep. I stood there trying to make sense of it. Then I convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. It had to be someone from work. Someone who knew where I lived. Someone who was messing with me. That was the only possibility that made sense. I crumpled up the note. I threw it away. I told myself I was overreacting. But when I returned to work, the notes continued. At first, they were still friendly. But something had changed. The tone became different. The kindness slowly disappeared. Then, after a few days of me refusing to respond, the messages became threatening. One note said, "You better answer me." Another said, "Remember, I know where you live." Those words completely changed everything. This was no longer a harmless game. This was someone demanding my attention. Someone who believed they had control over me. I thought about calling the police. I really did. But I still believed it was someone I knew. A coworker. Someone trying to scare me. Someone who would eventually reveal themselves. I decided to leave one final note. I wrote clearly, "Leave me alone or I will call the police." I didn't actually think I would need to. I believed this would force whoever it was to stop. If it was someone I knew, maybe they would finally admit it. Maybe they would apologize. Maybe they would realize they had gone too far. That afternoon when I left work, I walked toward my car expecting another message. But there was nothing. The note I had left was gone, and for the first time in days, there was no new note waiting for me. I stood there in silence. Part of me felt relieved. The nightmare seemed to be over. But another part of me still had questions. Who had been leaving those notes? How did they know where I lived? How did they know I was sleeping? And the question that bothered me the most, if someone was really behind it, why did they stop so suddenly? That night was the first time I truly felt like I was not alone. After everything that had happened with the notes, I was already on edge. Every small sound felt different. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Every creak from the house made my mind race. I kept telling myself that I was probably overreacting, that there had to be a simple explanation, that whoever had been leaving those notes was just someone playing a cruel joke. But deep down, I knew something had changed. The feeling of being watched had followed me home. Sometime in the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up. I don't even know what exactly woke me. At first, I just opened my eyes and stared into the darkness. The room was completely silent, too silent. Then I heard something, a faint noise somewhere outside my bedroom. I froze. I stayed completely still, barely breathing, trying to figure out if I was imagining it. For a full minute, I just sat there in bed listening. Then it happened again, a soft sound, almost like someone shifting their weight, like footsteps moving carefully across the floor. But it was so quiet that I couldn't tell if it was actually happening, or if my mind was creating sounds because I was afraid. Normally, I would have convinced myself it was nothing. Houses make noises. Pipes creak. Wood expands and contracts. There are countless normal explanations. But after finding that note in my car, I wasn't willing to take any chances. I slowly reached over and grabbed the baseball bat I kept nearby. I got out of bed and opened my bedroom door. The hallway seemed longer than usual. Every step toward the living room felt heavier. As I walked, my mind started creating every possible nightmare scenario. What if someone was really inside? What if they were waiting? What if I turned the corner and saw someone standing there? The truth was, even though I had a bat in my hands, I knew myself. I wasn't some fearless person. If someone was actually standing in my house, I honestly don't know if I would have been able to swing. Holding the bat made me feel slightly safer, but it didn't make me brave. When I reached the end of the hallway, I stopped. All the confidence I had when I left my bedroom disappeared. From where I was standing, I could see almost everything. The living room, the dining area, the kitchen. The entire open space was right in front of me, but the darkness made every corner look threatening. I imagined someone hiding behind the couch, someone standing silently near the kitchen counter, someone waiting for me to get closer. I reached over and turned on the dim lights. The room slowly appeared. I scanned every inch. Nothing moved. Nothing looked unusual, but I still couldn't bring myself to walk further. I stood there frozen for what felt like forever, listening, waiting, hoping to hear absolutely nothing. And thankfully, I heard nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement. After another minute, I finally made a decision. I turned the lights off and quickly walked back down the hallway. I didn't run, but I moved as fast as I could without losing control. The entire time, I expected something to happen. I expected someone to step out behind me. I expected a hand to grab my shoulder. I expected anything, but nothing did. I reached my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. Then I turned on the television. I needed noise. The silence had become unbearable. The sound of the TV made me feel like I was back in reality. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I almost forgot about what had happened during the night. For a few minutes, everything felt normal again. I got out of bed. I walked into the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator to grab some juice. And then I saw it. My entire body froze. There, stuck directly on the refrigerator door, was another neon pink sticky note. The same color, the same kind of note, the same handwriting. I stared at it. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. The message said, "You can't keep me away." And once again, there was a smiley face attached. I stood there completely frozen for what felt like 30 seconds. Then panic took over. I immediately started checking everything. The front door, the back door, every window, every possible entrance. Everything was locked. Exactly how I left it, and that was when the fear became something different. Because this was no longer just someone leaving notes on my car. This person had been inside my house, inside my home, the one place where I should have felt safe. I knew for a fact that nobody had a key. My family lived in another state. I wasn't close enough with anyone nearby to give them access. There was no forgotten spare key, no roommate, no explanation. Someone had entered my house without permission. Someone had walked through my home. Someone had stood close enough to my refrigerator to leave a message. I wasn't treating this like a joke anymore. I called the police. I explained everything from the beginning. The notes, the messages, the threats, the note inside my house. They came and investigated, but unfortunately there wasn't much evidence to work with. A series of anonymous notes was difficult to trace. They checked what they could. They tried looking into security footage around my workplace, but there was a problem. The employee parking area where I parked my car was not covered by cameras. The spaces were located along the side of the building outside the camera range. There was no footage showing who left the notes. The police eventually came to the conclusion that it was probably someone who knew me. And honestly, I would have agreed, if it wasn't for one impossible detail, the note inside my house. That was the part nobody could explain, because I was extremely careful about locking my doors, almost obsessive. I always checked them, sometimes more than once. I knew nobody should have been able to get inside. After everything that happened, I couldn't bring myself to sleep there. I stayed at a friend's house for several nights. I needed distance. I needed to feel safe again. While I was there, my friend and I went to a hardware store and bought completely new locks for every door. We replaced everything. New locks, new keys, a fresh start. At least that was the idea. When I finally returned home, my friend stayed the night with me. I didn't want to be alone. I expected something to happen. Another note, another message, another sign that whoever was doing this wasn't finished. But that night, nothing happened. No footsteps, no strange sounds, no neon pink note waiting for me. For the first time in days, I felt like maybe it was finally over. But looking back now, I realized something. Sometimes the scariest moments are not the moments when something happens. They are the moments when everything becomes quiet, and you start wondering if whatever was there is simply waiting. For the next few months, nothing happened. No more neon pink notes. No strange messages. No signs that someone was watching me. Slowly, I started to believe that maybe it was finally over. Life began to return to normal. I stopped checking over my shoulder every few minutes. I stopped waking up at every small sound in the house. I started convincing myself that maybe whoever had been doing this had moved on. Maybe they had lost interest. Maybe it really was just some twisted game that had finally ended. But then more than 2 months later, everything came back, and it happened in the most terrifying way possible. It was just another ordinary morning. I was getting ready for work like I had done countless times before. I walked outside, still half asleep, thinking about the day ahead. Then I saw it. My heart immediately dropped. Attached to my front door was another neon pink sticky note. The same color. The same type of paper. The same reminder of everything I had tried so hard to forget. For a moment I couldn't move. I just stood there staring at it. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to read it. Because deep down I already knew. The nightmare wasn't over. Slowly I reached out and grabbed the note. The message was short. Only one sentence. I guess you don't want to play anymore. I felt sick. Those words were simple, but they carried something much darker. This person wasn't angry. They weren't apologizing. They weren't afraid. They sounded disappointed, almost like they believed we had been playing some kind of game together, a game that only existed in their mind. I immediately called the police. But just like before, there wasn't much they could do. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses, no cameras showing who had been there. Just another anonymous note left behind by someone who knew exactly how to disappear. After that, I made serious changes. I installed security cameras around my house. I upgraded my security. I did everything I could to make sure nobody could ever enter my home again. And strangely enough, nothing ever happened after that. No more notes. No more messages. No more signs. The silence returned. But I've always wondered about one thing. Changing the locks may have been the only reason I am still here. Because the more I think about it, the more terrifying it becomes. That person had to have had access to my house somehow. There is no other explanation. They knew where I lived. They knew my routine. They knew enough about my life to leave messages that felt personal. And somehow they got inside a locked home. But the question that still haunts me is simple. Why me? And who was that person? Even after all these years, thinking back on the entire situation makes me uncomfortable. Sometimes I feel physically sick remembering it, especially when I think about that night. The night I woke up and heard something moving inside my house. I walked through that hallway holding a baseball bat. I stood at the edge of my living room. I searched the darkness, and I convinced myself there was nothing there. But now I wonder, what if there was someone? What if someone was actually hiding in my house that entire time? Maybe behind the couch. Maybe in another room. Maybe only a few feet away from where I was standing. The thought terrifies me, because if someone really was there, why didn't they do anything? Why didn't they attack me? Why didn't they reveal themselves? Were they only interested in frightening me? Was the fear itself the goal? A friend once suggested something that I still think about. He said that when I ran back to my bedroom and locked the door, maybe that action prevented something worse from happening. Maybe whoever was inside tried to follow me. Maybe they tried to get into my room. And maybe that locked door was the only thing standing between me and something I don't want to imagine. I don't know if that is true. I hope it isn't. But I also can't prove that it wasn't. It has been 10 years since I received that final note. A decade has passed. I have moved away. I am married now. I have built a completely different life. And thankfully nothing like that has ever happened again. But every time I see those bright pink sticky notes somewhere, even in a store or office, I still feel a strange sense of uneasiness. Because that color is no longer just a color to me. It is a reminder. A reminder of the months when someone was watching me. A reminder of the fear of not knowing who was behind it. A reminder that sometimes the scariest things are not monsters or ghosts. Sometimes the scariest thing is knowing that another person can be close to you, can enter your life without permission, and can leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. I may never ever know who that person was. I may never understand why they chose me. But one thing I do know, I am incredibly grateful that I am still here, still alive, still able to tell this story,